The Impossible Planet, Chapter 6, Four Empires in a Fragile World. Johann Edgar, American NSA Director. May 29, 2148. My hotel room's air conditioner whirred with dedication as my cursor hovered between the four Empire dossiers. After the SETI director's impromptu biology lecture, it was a relief to be back in the realm of politics, at least until it sank in that I had to summarize and perform threat assessments on four empires, each more important than every nation on Earth combined. Suddenly, the room felt a little bit too cold even for my carbon ass. Putting on the hotel bathrobe for illogical comfort of extra coverage, I carefully navigated my wireless mouse over to the file labeled Gifrid Empire and double-clicked to open it. The opening paragraph contained an image of a Gifrid along with a brief biological overview. Most of it I already knew from Lenfield, but there was one last detail that stuck out at me. Like most sapient species, all but the Yovi, as of this contact package, Gifrid are asexual life forms. Fortunately, I had paid the bare minimum attention in high school science classes required to know what that meant. No boys, no girls, just splitting and sprouting like bacteria. Adding that to the president's document under diplomatic considerations, I continued to read through. After the introductory paragraph came an explanation of Gifrid governance. Apparently, their planets were ruled by various colony lords who owned large swaths of land and carried out the will of their Grand Executive. Once elected, Grand Executive ruled for life in a sort of constitutional dictatorship. Colony lords had power to legislate within their territory, so long as it didn't contradict the top dog. They formed planetary councils that could petition their leader, and in theory, the Grand Executive could be deposed if enough councils received mandates from their people to do the job. Leaning back on my chair, I stared at the neat little chart of Gifrid governance. On paper, it looked downright civilized. Elections, checks, and balances, the works. Reading between the lines, though, I saw a monarchy with extra paperwork attached. What surprised me most about this government wasn't that it was dictatorial. We had plenty of wannabe strongmen on Earth who played the same game. The real shocker was just how damn stable it was. Supposedly, the system was established before Christ was born, and here they were still going strong. No bloody revolts, no constant regime changes, no election turnovers, just leaders with centuries of experience and all the power they needed. That whole deposing the Grand Executive thing? Initially, I'd assumed it was only possible on paper, the kind of empty promise you give to citizens to make them think they're in control. Turns out I was wrong. 1,000 years ago, their reigning Grand Executive started overtaxing and underperforming, so the councils told them to take a hike. When the bastard refused, they were dragged off to prison and all their assets seized. Then the Gifrid voted in the next guy and everything went back to normal. Switching over to the document for President Stein, I typed, Gifrid governance, stable constitutional dictatorship, functionally a monarchy. Checks and balances not for show. Sliding down from the conclusion to their government section, my eyes immediately latched onto the military header directly beneath it. The Gifrid weren't exactly chatty about numbers. No fleet counts, no firepower specs, nothing concrete that could be used against them. One line, though, stood out to me immediately. Apparently, over 90% of their ships were drones, not crewed frigates or carriers stacked with wide-eyed recruits. Drones. Disposable, obedient, and apparently able to be made in the thousands on an assembly line. They preferred to strike fast, strike hard, and put as few of their own in the line of fire as possible. This doctrine continued on the ground where Gifrid were stated to employ state-of-the-art synthetic soldiers. The numbers were scarce at best, but still this section taught me plenty about their doctrine. Gifrid use mostly machines for warfare. They avoid fielding soldiers. It wasn't until I came to the section marked Demographics that I learned why that was. When I first saw the population estimate of over 20 billion, the part of my brain that was still a lizard waiting to bathe on a sunrock recoiled at the sheer implied number of aliens. That feeling, however, lasted for about 3 seconds before I realized just how much smaller that was than I'd been expecting. Sure, they outnumbered us 2-1, but given their resources, you'd think the number would be much higher. Taking a look back at their biology section, I eventually figured out the reason for this disparity. Gifrid only produce 1 or 2 offspring every 100 years. This too was going in the docket. Slow reproduction. Population, 20 billion. Alien as they undoubtedly were, the Gifrid were a species I had at least had the honor of speaking to. Maneuvering back to the package menu and selecting the file labeled FUNAC Parliament, I was already leaving behind even the vaguest familiarity and plunging myself headfirst into the unknown to bob for information. Upon first glance, the Funak reminded me of a mixture between a gorilla and a mythological rock golem. Their skin was like smooth gray stone, with small crystal protrusions near the shoulders. Like the Gifrid, they were big, 9 to 10 feet tall when on 2 legs, though they usually walked around on all 4s. They weren't as long-lived as the Gifrid, with lifespans of about 600 years, still absolutely flooring compared to a human, but not quite as mind-bending. As for listed temperature range, they were stated here to thrive best between 400 and 500 degrees Celsius. Apparently, these ridiculous temps were normal, not just for the Gifrid, but for just about all the life in the galaxy. Leafing through their government section, I was relieved to see that the parliament part of their name wasn't ornamental. The Funak operated off of a democratic system complete with councils, prime ministers, and election cycles. Technically, by our standards, they were closer to a republic than a parliamentary democracy, but I wasn't about to argue semantics with them. Scrolling further, I saw their election cycles spelled out. 30 years for local leadership, 60 for prime ministers. I damn near spat out my coffee. 60 years? Our presidents got 4 years, maybe 8 if they were good or we were stupid, before getting tossed out for the next guy who promises cheaper gas and better slogans. With a 6th-century lifespan, 60 years probably feels to them like 2 terms in Congress. But to us, that's an entire lifetime under one administration. Hell, if FDR had been a Funak, he'd still be in office today. Democracy. Long terms but functional. Looking into their policies, I was for the most part pleasantly surprised. The Funak matched up damn near perfectly with Western democratic values. Not only that, checking the military tab, their fleet was stated to be tied for #1 in the galaxy. They were like an idealized version of the former NATO powers in space. This, I had decided, was more than likely going to be the power I recognized Stein push for an alliance with. Then, however, I came upon the religion section. At first, I assumed I wouldn't find anything more than formalities in there. The name of their god or gods, what they considered taboo. The first sentence immediately shattered that idea like glass. Religious teaching and expression is strictly outlawed in Funak space. What? I murmured in confusion, immediately scrolling down for more. Apparently the Funak used to be a largely theocratic people when they were still stuck on their homeworld, Distera. There, one major religion arose focused around 2 network supervolcanoes as sacred. Their largest cities were built around them and pilgrimages were conducted to bathe in their molten springs. In comparison to how unusual Silicon life seemed to me at first, this faith sounded almost normal. As it turns out, though, those supervolcanoes were due for an eruption. Funak scientists tried to warn people, but their findings were suppressed by theocratic leadership, who insisted that the spirit fountains couldn't possibly harm them. When the findings did get out, religious leadership ordered that anyone who tried to leave the radius lacked faith and was to be excommunicated, a social death sentence by their standards. Turns out no amount of prayers was going to stop that magma, and the volcanoes went off. Only 15% of the Funak population survived that event. After that, they swore off faith like it was a disease. I rubbed my eyes, suddenly more tired than I had any right to be given my bloodstream steadily becoming coffee-based. On paper, the Funak looked tantalizingly good. Democracy with centuries-long stability, policies so clean they make our planet look ass backwards by comparison, all defended by a military on par with anyone in the galaxy. If we were smart, we'd be begging them to take us under their wing. But then there was the fine print. No religion. Not keep it out of schools. Not don't mix it with government. Outlawed. Period. In a lot of ways, I felt bad for them. Their ancestors, apparently this took place 800 years ago, had to watch as their worldview killed their own loved ones and then decided that they'd never let it happen again. Rational. Maybe. Extreme? Absolutely. Political suicide if tried on Earth? 100%. Half of our planet would sooner burn than sign off on that kind of deal. Hell, half of that half would probably start the fire. Direct hostility is unlikely, but outright alliance would be problematic, I wrote. Next on the list of alien empires was the Yovi Imperium. The first thing that stuck out to me was the Imperium part of their nation's name. Images flashed through my mind of the ancient Romans and other similarly authoritarian regimes throughout human history. Please don't be the space Roman Empire with nukes, I grumbled as though attempting to negotiate with reality itself. Opening the file, my eyes immediately locked onto the image of a Yovi. They were humanoid, tall and slender with bodies like smooth, angular obsidian. Spikes atop their heads superficially invoked the notion of hair, the protrusions getting shorter as they continued down the creature's spine and to the tip of their tail just large enough to drag on the floor. Despite the obvious differences, these aliens were much closer to what I'd always imagined in passing from first contact. Not lookalikes, but at least analogous enough to us. Checking their biology paragraph, the numbers were no more absurd than those of the Funak or Gifrid. 750-year lifespans made them slightly less long-lived than the centipedes currently loitering in our skies, and their temperature tolerances were well in line with what I'd already read from the others. The Yovi were listed as gonochoric, a term I had to look up that meant they could be one of two sexes, male or female barring outliers. Compared to the asexual Gifford, this small biological similarity was almost a comfort. Combine this with their exotic yet familiar appearance, and I could already see certain groups of people taking a personal interest in them. Two sexes, I wrote. Males and females like humans. Reluctantly scrolling past to the government section, it was obvious within the few sentences that the word Imperium wasn't for show. The Yovi were run by a council of aristocrats drawn from families of wealth and military influence. From their ranks, one of them was elevated to the status of Emperor for life, charged with making the most important decisions, when to go to war chief among them. Apparently, Yovi leaders were judged not on policy or popularity, but how many new planets they can stick under their proverbial boot. New territory, new goods, new slaves, these were the currencies of Yovi governance. Unfortunately, this setup wasn't anything Earth hadn't seen before. From Rome to Russia, we've had no shortage of expansionist oligarchies. Reading through the finer details of their council setup, it was obvious this wasn't some noble experiment in governance. It was a system built to keep the warhawks fat and happy. Yovi government, I wrote. Oligarchy of wealthy military families. Expansionism hardwired. Moving on to their military, at first I was happy to see that the Gifrid had gone ahead and included actual ship estimates. My relief, however, quickly gave way to wide-eyed horror as I looked at what those details were. The Yovi had tens of thousands of ships, a good portion of which were dreadnoughts with enough munitions to devastate a continent. Mandatory conscription meant that in a matter of months they could field and deploy more soldiers than there were humans on Earth. Yovi war doctrine wasn't about surgical strikes like the Gifrid or deterrence like the Funak. They specialized in overwhelming force. Despite this, however, the Yovi did appear to have something resembling rules of war, though they didn't look anything at all like our own. When invading technologically inferior species, something that they apparently did often enough for it to be noted in their military strategy, the Yovi had a rule against using technology better than their opponents. If the enemy is fighting with spears and bows, then so are the Yovi. This mercy, however, did not extend to battles against those with nuclear weapons or starships. Once you can split the atom, they take off the kid gloves. Supposedly, the reason they did this wasn't to be fair to their enemies, but so that their soldiers could always have the honor of saying they fought an equal opponent, even when numbers-wise, the enemy never stood a chance. Biggest fleet in galaxy along with Funak. Can field estimated 15 billion soldiers. Warriors by code. Finally managing to tear my gaze away from the ship counts, I scrolled through information until I hit the section marked culture. If there was one species that might annihilate us for a social faux pas, it was this one. So figuring out how not to piss them off, ideally before our first meeting with them, was going to be important. As one might expect from a species with such expansive fleets, the Yovi were a civilization of warriors. Their equivalents to high school were as much for weapon mastery and tactics as they were for math and science. Contrary to what I'd been expecting, though, their cities were beautiful works of art and civil engineering. The Yovi took almost as much pride in running their territories as they did in getting them. Not that that was any comfort to their slaves. Here's the real kicker, though. The Yovi were the only other species in the galaxy with concepts of romance. Not only was love something they were capable of, it was apparently central to their culture. The heroes of their epics were like if Julius Caesar was written by Shakespeare, embarking on long campaigns of conquest in the name of love. In their most famous poems, star-crossed Yovi burned down their enemies and built dynasties from the ashes. God help us when the internet gets a hold of this. Staring at my screen for a few seconds as I contemplated how to even word the explanation, I sighed and typed out, romance-based warrior culture. They value love similarly to humans. Similarly, At the end of the day, this species was closer to humanity than the Funak or Gifford could hope to be. Maybe that was the problem. Treat as a threat. Last on the list of major spacefaring empires, which I noted with dismay, implied the existence of minor spacefaring empires they just weren't going to tell us about, was the Vela. The image of them was definitely the least intimidating of the bunch. 2-foot-tall gemstones with spider legs that looked like they could be punted away with a steel-toed boot. Hell, they were almost cute. Then I read the part about them living for 2,000 years and they stopped seeming so quaint. Militarily, the Vela faithful supposedly had the smallest fleet of the Big Four, just enough to protect them from pirates and minor Yovi border skirmishes. They didn't attack other FTL empires, content instead to trade peacefully. That being said, their fleet technology was said to be state-of-the-art, so I wasn't about to underestimate them. Smallest fleets, peaceful traders. As far as their economy went, however, the Vela were a powerhouse beyond peer. Apparently, their government was ruled by merchant priests, whose political influence was judged by their wealth. The wealthiest merchant priest supposedly owned a Dyson sphere, a word I wasn't familiar with. When I looked it up, though, my jaw damn near hit the floor. Leader has a Dyson sphere, fully harvested star, I typed, barely able to believe the words clicking onto the page. Supposedly, this star supplied enough energy to fuel their entire empire, and every other merchant priest paid tribute to exalted prophet for access to its power reserves. Checking their technology section for any further information on this harvested star, I didn't find much. All the Gifford were willing to tell us here was that within the orbit of that star was a planet containing primitive sapient life. The Vela enslaved them, and now they mine day and night just for the privilege of their planet being heated. Slavers. Dangerous. For a species claiming to be composed of priests, the sheer callousness of their leader's act stuck out as strange to me. Clearly, whatever beliefs they held were different from those of Earth's religions, so I navigated down to the section on their faith and read through it. Within Vela cosmology, all of the matter and energy in the universe was originally concentrated into one all-powerful, all-benevolent being. They believed that this entity essentially shattered itself to become the universe and bring about life. It reminded me of Genesis thrown into a blender with the Big Bang. As far as the Vela believed, the more matter and energy you owned, the more this deity's undying spirit could guide you. As far as the Vela were concerned, any endeavor that resulted in more stuff for oneself was a holy pursuit. Their engineering, their government, their diplomacy, all of it was directed solely for the procurement and defense of their possessions. Ruthless in pursuit of wealth. Do not trust. Saving the file for Stein and closing my laptop, I let out a groan of pent-up anxiety. For now, all we had to worry about was dealing with the Gifford in orbit. Eventually, however, the time would come where we'd have to step onto the galactic stage proper and declare who our allies and enemies were. Deep down, I'd been hoping against hope for an easy answer, uncomplicated galactic good guys we could cling to. However, none of the options listed in that data packet fit the bill. And yet, whether we were ready or not, we'd have to come together and make the choice. Because I got the feeling that if we didn't buckle down and get our shit together, the next ships in Earth's orbit wouldn't be exploration vessels.